I think we'll just make a start on it because it's quite a short session and we've got quite a lot to get through. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the full paper session on experimenting with generative learning methods. We've got three really interesting papers and presenters with us today, and looking forward to a really interesting discussion afterwards. Can we have the next slide, please, Polina? So as usual, before we start, I would like to start by an acknowledgement. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of my homeland in Selangor, Malaysia, the Temuan and the Mahmeri people. I also pay respects to my ancestors, which are Chinese Teochew Malaysian, elders past and present in my birth country and in my adopted country where I'm joining from. I'm currently based in Northumberland in the northeast of England, near Newcastle, so hopefully we'll see some of you next week, which is a historically contested borderland between Scotland and England, as with many places with a complex history of conquests, starting with Romans, Vikings, Anglians, and Normans, and continues to be welcoming to settler migrants like myself. So thank you. And again, as per usual, some guidelines for being together. And again, something just to be mindful of our differences, where we're all joining from, and also be patient with any technical constraints and hiccups. I welcome you to listen deeply and participate with respect. Please do mute your microphone during the sessions in order not to avoid interrupting the presentations. Also be mindful of the choice of words when you would like to sort of comment or put reflections or questions to the panelists. And try to make your expressions and languages inclusive. Please do not judge or trivialize others and critique respectfully. Again, try to anchor any reflections or your perspective from direct experiences or personal observations. As you join the session, you would have been informed that the sessions are recorded. And again, if you wish to be anonymous, please turn off your camera, and when you pose a question on the Q&A, to pose it anonymously. I would also like to invite you to acknowledge the traditional custodians and land from where you are attending from in the Zoom box. So that again allows us to know where we are zooming in from and understanding and paying respects to the place we come from. Next slide, please. So on that note, I would like to invite our first paper presentation. The paper is Brave and Kind Superheroes, Turing's Reflection on the Design Protagonist Role. And I'd like to invite Netta, who's one of the presenting authors, to share and be present for any questions. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions or reflections, please put it in the Q&A chat box, and we will endeavor to respond to that. And what we'll do is we'll have a short break after each paper presentation for any clarifying questions. If not, then we can keep that for the end for the full discussion. Okay, and I'll mute.
Hello everyone, my name is Netta Iivari and I'm presenting this paper on behalf of Matin Mahboob Kanafi and Marianne Kinnula, in which we are describing children's reflections on the design protagonist role, and we are from University of Oulu from Finland. First, I'm going to offer some motivation why we have carried out this research, and then briefly our theoretical lens and research design involved in this study. I'm going to present some of our empirical findings and then discuss their implications. Digital technology has been thoroughly embedded in our everyday life for long. In participatory design community, it has been acknowledged for a long time that people from babies till the elderly are actively engaging with digital tools as part of their everyday life, in their homes, during their leisure time, not only in the workplaces. It has also been acknowledged, particularly in child-computer interaction research community, that children are a significant group of users of digital tools, and for sure their adult life will be shaped by digitalization seriously in the future. And it's also acknowledged that children should not be positioned only as users of digital technology, but they should have a stronger role. And for several decades, it has been emphasized that children should be engaging as informants, users, as well as design partners in the development of digital technology. And this has been very heavily inspired by the tradition of participatory design. Nowadays, it is discussed that children should be invited as makers and shapers of digital technology. This discussion has led to the notion of design protagonist. It has been argued that children should become such, and we should be educating children to become such. And this discussion is heavily inspired by the Scandinavian political participatory design tradition, and this design protagonist role maintains that children should be the ones driving development of digital technology, but they should be also critically reflecting on digital technology as part of their everyday life as well as in the society. So empirical research has already been carried out relating to this role, and the researchers have identified challenging regarding adoption of this role by children. It's definitely not easy, therefore more research is needed. And it is also clear that there isn't that much research yet, and it's a little bit unclear what are the actual characteristics of design protagonists. What kind of skills and characteristics are required for that from children? And one thing is also that children's perspective on this role is yet missing. What children think about this role. So this is what we have been particularly exploring, what children think about this role and how they adopt it or not. And we have been inspired by nexus analysis as our theoretical lens. Nexus analysis, introduced by Scollon and Scollon, emphasizes that one should be studying social action, and from a situated perspective, one should be always interested in what is happening actually in situ. And one should also acknowledge that whatever is happening in situ, for example, design, it's always influenced by historical bodies, interaction orders, discourses in place. Discourses are being produced and reproduced in the situation, as well as societal discourses are always intertwined with in situ action. People's historical bodies, their backgrounds, experiences, life histories are always intermingled. And interaction orders, relationships between people, they are both formed in the situation, but there are also societal level norms and rules shaping the in situ action. So we utilized this theoretical lens for making sense of our project that we had carried out, My Superhero Project, which we carried out in one school in Oulu in Finland in collaboration with an ICT teacher and two classes of 7th graders who are around 13 to 14 years old. So children learned about digital technology design during this project, but they were also addressing an actual and very serious societal problem of bullying at school. And the activities children were involved in, first we introduced the project and the researchers to the children, and the children filled in a survey in which we were inquiring their background, skills and characteristics. Then we created this My Superhero booklet that the children filled in. In this booklet, children ideated a superhero who would be able to tackle the problem of bullying at school, and children were describing its characteristics and writing stories how the superhero would do that. And that superhero was also assumed to utilize digital technology for tackling of bullying. So children were also ideating what kind of digital tool the superhero would be using. And in the end, we were also asking whether the children considered that they themselves possessed the characteristics that they saw the superhero to possess. And these were carried out as an individual activity, but later on the children formed groups and they engaged in the design and development of prototypes of the digital tools. Of course, they had to find a shared idea, what kind of prototype to build. And later on, they were presenting the prototypes to other children, teachers, researchers, and they were also reflecting on the activity. So here are some empirical findings from our project. The children ideated various kinds of powerful superheroes in their booklets, and here are some pictures of them children drew in the booklets. It was very interesting to find out the children ideated the following characteristics as most common in their answers for the superheroes. They were seen to be brave and smart, independent and kind, creative, helpful, leading, happy, and fast. We categorized these as personal traits as well as to represent social skills, management and leadership skills, analytical skills, creative skills, and technical skills. The child groups created very impressive prototypes, and some of the groups actually even implemented the prototype ideas. They programmed them, and some of them were developing games like God is Watching or Escape the Bully, and others were devoted, for example, on working on behalf of LGBTQIA community, and they were creating an app to inform about that. And others were creating apps or blogs or digital tokens, robots or cars, different kinds of prototypes. As can be seen, the children identified a variety of learning outcomes, what they had learned during the project. Most notably, they had learned about bullying prevention, according to them. But for example, creativity and different kinds of technical and design-related skills were brought up, as well as social and communication-related ones. We mapped this variety again by categorizing the learning outcomes into developing personal traits or characteristics, or gaining social and communication-related skills, management and leadership skills, analytical, creative, or technical skills. We also carried out detailed analysis of children's actual engagement in design activities, and we identified different kinds of roles children adopted. And we claim some of these children clearly adopted the role of design protagonist. They were driving the work, they were leading their group, they were critically reflecting on technology, they were showing leadership skills, strong social skills, they were leading the group. But there were also many children who contributed significantly, but they still didn't possess all the characteristics of a design protagonist. And they were, for example, creating very nice designs during the ideation phase, but that didn't end up being implemented in the group work, or they themselves considered lacking social or management skills, as an example. There were also children who were complaining a lot and who required a lot of help and support during different phases, but they were performing well after receiving that. But there were some children who were clearly not interested in, they might be interested in the beginning, but they stopped contributing later on, or they didn't show any interest overall. We also identified various kinds of historical body and interaction order related issues influencing what was happening in the design activity. this was happening in the context of school with a familiar class of children, familiar teacher, and obviously the children had shared background, particular kinds of design and technology related skills in the context of school as well as in the context of their leisure time. And this topic of bullying was clearly significant for many children. They had personal interest in creating the prototype, personal interest in helping those victimized. They enjoyed tackling a real world problem, which had also emotional impact. And we also identified the significance of teachers' role in various ways. And for these design protagonist children, we also identified that many of them said that they didn't get these skills, competencies, and traits from school, but they were self-learned people in this respect. That was their opinion. Our study contributes in different ways. First of all, we show that some children actually adopted this design protagonist role in the design process, but we also showed that it wasn't so clear to draw the line. Many children possessed some of the characteristics, but not all of them. And we also identified children's perspective. What are the characteristics of a design protagonist? And we think these are very interesting and valuable. And we were also identifying different kinds of factors that were mediating children's agency in the design process. Our study has very interesting implications. For example, the design protagonist characteristics that we identified, we think that the personal traits that we identified are something we should be discussing as a research community further. But also we should be broadening the characteristics of design protagonist also from the viewpoint of skills. The children pointed out different kinds of social and communication related skills, management and leadership skills, analytical creative skills. So we think that those have been neglected in the literature until now, and those should be acknowledged better. But for the personal traits, I think we as a community should also be considering, and also with adults, with university students, with children in basic education, how can we be educating compassionate design protagonists, friendly, happy, brave design protagonists, independent, wise, and soul-lifting design protagonists? How could we be doing that? It's not only design and technical skills, but we should be considering this much more broadly. Another interesting issue are the various roles children adopted in the design process. Of course, we are mostly interested in supporting the people, including children, adopting the design protagonist role, but we should acknowledge that people adopt also other kinds of roles in the design process in collaboration with us. We should be considering how can we facilitate people becoming design protagonists, driving technology development, critically reflecting on it and its outcomes. And we should acknowledge that some of the people might be self-learned or natural design protagonists, but others need support for that. And we should acknowledge that there potentially are also ideators interested in having many skills and capabilities, but they need more support, as well as the complainers. We should be devoting our attention to them and help them to participate as well. And also consider the disinterested in. Could we support them and encourage them to become interested in? These are questions we should be considering in the future.
That's great, thank you. We already have a couple of questions. I think for clarifying questions, we can maybe try to pose that to Netta before she has to potentially fly off and won't be able to join us for the final Q&A. So Netta, I think the first question by Katharina and added to by Ricardo is, did the children of participants have a say or decision on the topic of bullying in the school? Was that given by the teachers or yourself as researchers? And then Ricardo's questions about how do you then decide to use technology to tackle that issue?
Thank you for the questions. And yes, hello everyone. I'm currently at the Reykjavik airport and my flight is leaving in less than an hour, but I'm happy to discuss. I don't have to leave now yet. So yes, this was part of research work of Matin, our doctoral researcher, but our research unit is engaged in much larger program of tackling bullying in schools. And Matin decided to address the same topic with children. And basically it is something City of Oulu, our local city officials have asked us to do in collaboration with them. So it is adult decided initiative, but bullying is really a serious problem in Finland, around Finland, and continuously we are getting this news about the topic. So it's adult decided, but like I said, many children had personal interest in tackling it. So they were free to decide what kind of bullying situations, what kind of domination, oppression, marginalization, violence they are thinking of. And some of the groups decided, or they all decided different kinds of bullying situations. And in our unit, we are anyway working relating to design of digital technologies, digitalization. So for our research, we are considering the potential of digital tools, and this work is connected to technology education with children in any case. So naturally bullying can be addressed also without digital tools, but digital tools have great potential in many different ways. So we are very interested in exploring particularly digital technologies here in this context.
Thank you, Netta. I think we have time for just one perhaps clarifying question before we have to move on, because we do have very tight schedule. I think Vincenzo, you put a question in the chat saying, or asking around the choice of the metaphor of using a superhero. Was that could that hint that the solution of the problem is outside of them, and could it be, was that considered a risk?
I'm not sure where the question is.
Oh, so the question has now been put in the Q&A.
Okay.
Yes, so Vincenzo was just saying, well, did you consider the risk that the superhero metaphor could hint that the solution of the problem, bullying in this case, is outside of the children's, agency?
Yeah, there are these issues, but they were kind of two separate tasks, because originally the superhero booklet, we wanted to inquire what kind of heroes children ideated for tackling the issue, and what kind of characteristics they saw those superheroes to possess, who could come and solve this serious issue affecting their own life. But in groups, they started then coming up with actual prototypes. So then they had to negotiate anyway the kind of whose idea, how to combine or select one of them. And at that point, there was serious negotiation ongoing among the children. So it was a little bit different process again.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Netta. And I was just about to type in the chat, was for the questions that we're not able to pose in the session, we can forward it on to you later on, and perhaps you can, or you can get in touch directly with the authors if you're interested. I think, but thank you, Netta. I think in terms of timing, we should move on to the second paper. And we'd like to invite Ricelli and Joel to talk about their science fictioning participatory design.
Hello everyone, I'm Ricelli Laplace and I'm a PhD fellow at Aarhus School of Architecture.
And I'm Joel Letkemann, also a PhD student at the Aarhus School of Architecture.
And in this presentation, we will talk about the paper that we wrote together for this conference, called Science Fiction in Participatory Design. Our paper describes a workshop in participatory design within architectural education that we did together doing our PhDs. The workshop was based on two methodologies from our respective research, called Responsible Architecture and Science Fictioning.
In the first part of this presentation, we unfold these two theoretical frameworks. Then we talk about the methods we used within the workshop and to collect and analyze our data. Then we will explore the experiment and the specific pedagogical methods that we developed combining these methods. We describe these methods under the headings of authorship, storytelling, and translation, and correlate them to the three phases of the project. Then we conclude with the implications for participatory design processes in education and future possibilities for research.
Regarding the theoretical frameworks, the first one is Responsible Architecture, or RA. It's a methodology based on value-led participatory learning experiments to define ecological values and methods and their implications to inspire sustainable behavior in design. In contrast with the notion that people's decision-making and behavior are based on facts, knowledge, and reasoning, research has shown that they are actually highly impacted by emotions, identity, and values. In order to move towards a sustainable future, there is a need for a cultural transition in the worldview of individuals and institutions, rather than for mere technological fixes, which is usually the focus in sustainable architecture. Therefore, responsible architecture stages the design processes by inviting participants to co-create shared values with the goal to engage with people's current value system to enable personal and cultural transition towards an ecological worldview. Our values, worldviews, and behaviors are interlinked and influencing each other. Therefore, a change in people's worldviews means a change in values and can impact behavior. In this scenario, participatory design can offer ideal conditions for the co-creation of shared values and problem solving, and to encourage participants to be a collective of action-taking individuals, to put into practice their responsibilities and abilities to respond to local ecological issues. Value-led participatory design processes can have material outcomes as the design product, but also immaterial outcomes, helping transforming the participants' ways of thinking.
Science fictioning explores speculative potentials within architectural design and pedagogy. It shares affinities with long-standing speculative practices in architectural design and also practices such as design fiction and speculative design, which make more explicit reference to science fiction. While each of these explores the benefit of speculative storytelling for design, none of them develops far beyond a popular understanding of science fiction and its contribution to design thinking. Rather than the certainty of a singular future imagined as an extended present, science fiction is a tool to explore multiple futures. Expecting that the future will unfold according to present-day knowledge puts limits on what can be imagined, what Frederick Jameson calls a project to colonize the future from the perspective of the present. However, building upon the science fiction practice of world building, Donna Haraway reminds us that the project of imagining the world is a project of changing the way we think about the world, and of sharing that with one another. The practice of storytelling is a chance to test these futures together and to understand how they might generate the potential for worldly practices in the present. The question of storytelling is also a question of authorship. Part of being a storyteller is knowing one's authorial voice, that it comes from a unique, situated perspective, and knowing which other voices to include in the future. Science fictioning asks all present and future architects to become active and conscientious storytellers, alone and with others, fully aware that, in Donna Haraway's invocation, stories make worlds.
In this paper, we describe a 2-week participatory design workshop for second-year architecture students called Materializing Futures. This workshop is one of several happening between 2020 and 2023 as part of a long-term participatory design collaboration between our school and a local community called Institute for X. In this workshop, students work with stakeholders from this community in a contested and rapidly gentrifying site in Aarhus, Denmark, where the school is also situated. The participatory process starts from participants imagining a 50-year horizon for their shared future, using this to frame their hopes and ambitions for the community, and working backwards to develop community initiatives that work towards that future.
The workshop is organized into 3 phases: aligning futures, worlding futures, and building futures. Each phase had a duration of 3 to 4 days, and the 3 methods described in the following sections roughly correspond to each phase: authorship, storytelling, and translation. We also share specific exercises in each phase, which we have found beneficial both as pedagogical tools and within the processes of participatory design. In order to understand the efficacy of our proposed methods, we collected data including students' production, a reflection logbook, conversation with participants, and observation of student-stakeholder interactions. We also observed and took notes from several meeting sessions between students and stakeholders and complemented this data with individual conversations with participants.
In the first phase, Aligning Futures, students explored authorship and the many authors, human and non-human, that can produce a work of design, as well as power dynamics in decision-making. From the personal intrinsic values of each participant, we staged conversations with stakeholders in which we asked them to find shared values as the starting point of their participatory process. These exercises allowed people to be explicit about their values and worldviews and articulate common values as their baseline for collaboration. Students' first task was for them to articulate the values that inform their individual, personal, and professional lives, as later share their values with their peers. This exercise helps students to identify for themselves where they can activate their values and have an impact on the world, both as individuals and as professionals, and how architectural practice can emerge from personal values and not only from disciplinary norms. After that, we asked them to express their values in relation to peers in their work group. And after sharing their values with one another, they should then develop a common identity by naming their group. This self-naming exercise was important in establishing identity, but also in negotiating how one's individual values intersect with other people's values. Later, we asked each group to do the same with their stakeholders. As a first step, students and stakeholders shared their values as a way to help the negotiation process and understand other stakeholders' values and motivations. The stakeholders participated in various ways: formal presentations, shared and one-on-one discussions, and informal conversations and visits on site. Students were also encouraged to think of themselves as stakeholders and active in the collective future of their school surroundings, speaking both for themselves and for the future generations of students. From an analysis of their self-reported logbooks, we believe that this exercise helps students in understanding their own motivation and agency in the project and increase their engagement in the process. It helped to reveal the often unconscious process through which one's own values are connected to one's design practice, and how this might be productive in one's professional life. Finally, we observed that these exercises enhance students' individual responsibility and desire to respond holistically to issues in the project, and to develop empathy and awareness of how others are implicated in the design process.
In the second phase, Worlding Futures, students worked with other stakeholders in proposing future visions with the ecology of actors on the site. These were captured in what we called the Article of Hope, a utopian document which reflects stakeholders' worldviews and collects their hopes for the community. This Article of Hope exercise developed a vision of the site as it could be in 50 years' time, relying on modes of expression that are explicitly science fictional, and like other works in that genre, makes the future become visible and thinkable to others. The Article of Hope is produced by students over several iterations, in dialogue with other stakeholders, as a way to share hopes for the future, but also to probe the potential consequences of the world implied by each suggestion. It is a way for stakeholders to communicate their long-term hopes and aspirations for the site, acting as a guide to future action and decision-making. However, with the intention of open-ended design, it is always aware that utopia is an ongoing practice, not a declaration of finality. The attention to futures meant that each stakeholder's immediate needs and demands were subordinated to farther-ranging hopes for the future that were imagined together. These hopes became the basis for continued conversation and collaboration between stakeholders. The unique possibilities of speculative storytelling are a way to include actors who would otherwise not necessarily be represented, from the silent voice of non-human ecologies on site to actors on a global scale, such as the specter of climate change. In the final phase, Materializing Futures, we asked students to suggest a first step towards the environment implied in the Article of Hope, describing the material consequences of the values and hopes developed in the previous phases. However, recognizing that no work of architecture is ever finished, We encourage students to consider maintaining openness and contingency in the project, leaving space for the continued development as futures are imagined and reimagined together by the community.
Finally, the course closed with an exercise we called Value Action Design Response, based on the idea from Homer and Cale's cognitive hierarchy model, where cognitions are organized ranging from more abstract cognitions like values to mid-range cognitions like attitudes, and eventually to specific behaviors. So this exercise aimed in helping the translation of conceptual ideas such as values and hopes into concrete design proposals for the site. Here, students divided their work in 3 columns. The first column included the values that emerged from their dialogues with stakeholders in phase 1. Students chose keywords that best represented those values and a short text explaining each keyword's meaning. In the second column, they had to think about the attitudes and actions they wanted their design to promote if they wanted to respond to these values. In this case, the attitudes and actions cultivated within the articles of hope in phase 2 was a means to promote this conversation and mutual understanding. In the third column, students began to speculate about how design ideas can respond to each action. Depending on their desired action, the design response could be references, sketches, focusing on concrete responses. The VAR exercise showed to be a valuable guide to design decision-making, revealing to students how choices in design could never be innocent, but a response aligned with values and future hopes in architecture. While most students were successful in translating values to design choices aided by this tool, further critical exploration and development of this method is needed in order to facilitate continued stakeholder reflection on materializing conceptual ideas into design choices.
These design proposals were intended to reflect the long-term ambitions of the whole community while remaining open to continued intervention and interpretation. As a result, the choices around material, spaces, and present and future uses all refer back to the values that had first inspired them. As the design developed, so did the Article of Hope, with all stakeholders continuing to develop their aspirations for the community.
In this study, we have noted several beneficial outcomes for participatory design and design pedagogy. We found that staging exercises in order to probe each stakeholder's deeply held values and imaginations for the future developed empathy between actors and provoked shared decision-making, becoming the spark to bridge local and global ecological demands and different worldviews, and translate abstract ideas to the specifics of design. However, these methods are part of an ongoing research, and further study is needed in order to understand the long-term pedagogical effects of the methodologies, especially how it impacted students' future projects and design practice. While we have documented these methodologies in an educational setting, further research could explore how they could impact participatory decision-making in practice. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Ricelli. Thank you, Joe. That was, again, a fantastic, really interesting paper. We do have a question from Ricardo, who's not able to pose the question in the quick Q&A. And he was asking, how did you design the workshops, prompts, and activities?
Do you want to go up first, Joe, or should I?
I think you can go ahead first. Yeah.
Okay. So this workshop was the second one. So I did a previous workshop before with 130 students. It was a little bit bigger, but with the same community, same stakeholders. And because my research, it's within environmental psychology and the issues of how to explore worldviews and translate that to sustainable behavior. I did a lot of research within psychology, so psychological, like a process of learning and environmental education also. So a lot of my strategies for how to design the workshops came from there. So for the second workshop, there was a lot of things that I tried in the first workshop, some things that worked and some things that didn't work that well. So this second workshop was an upgrade of that first one, let's say. And but one of the most important things that I learned from my literature review that I thought was very interesting to try out with architects, it's to do the negotiation process and how can I say, teach them how to talk to people and how to understand the human first, and then to connect, and then go to design. And actually in the first workshop, also in the second workshop, there was a very challenge for them, because architects are so used to go to the place and start drawing, sketching right away, and like already coming up with solutions. And during 3 days, we didn't allow them to do that. I was like, okay, chill and try to first understand and listen deeply the place and the people that you're working with. So yeah, it was very much informed by social science, psychology, anthropology, and stuff like that from my part. But Joe also had his own.
Yeah, just very, very briefly, I think this is the 7th, I guess, workshop or teaching sort of thing I've done in the course of my PhD. So it does build upon the sort of previous experiences there, but it's largely informed by scholarship around science fiction and utopian literature, which is really about the affordances that science fiction visions supply to the imagination, and how to read those and how to activate them. I think that's where it came from.
Great, thanks. We have probably time for just one very short response to Layla's question, which ties into this Ricelli's point about getting students to talk to others, which is about did the students find any kind of, were there any values that came up that surprised you, and were there any kind of opposing values, and how were they resolved?
Sorry, can you repeat the?
Yes, so the questions is in the Q&A, and Layla was asking, were there any values that surprised you, and were there any opposing values, and how were they resolved?
Actually, I'm from Brazil, and I've been doing participatory design since I was working there in Brazil. And in Brazil, there are a lot of opposing values, and basically my work there was to solve conflict. But this project that I'm doing now, it's in Denmark, and it's a much more homogeneous society, let's say. So I was surprised actually there was not many opposing values, and I was expecting that, and I kind of wanted that, and I wanted the conflict in a way because it was interesting. But there wasn't many opposing values. But what I found there was they use the same words, and maybe they have the same like basic cultural values and the values of like, oh, sustainability. But how does that translate to real action? It's the main difference. So our school, our institution has a way of viewing this, and the community that we're working with, that's very like grassroots and independent and local community, has a very different way of seeing this, and each student also. So that's where we had to negotiate. Okay, we are using very similar words, and we might come from a very similar culture, but what does that really mean when we talk about translating this to action and to design choices? So that's where the tricky part was, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Ricelli. Anything else to add very briefly, Joel?
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay. We need to move on to Ricardo's next final paper, but there is one more question for you guys on the Q&A from Chris. And if you'd like to respond to that on the chat, please do so.
Thank you.
And I'd like to invite Ricardo.
My name is Ricardo Sosa, and I'm going to present this work called Food for Advanced Computational Thinking. This is a project we've done in the last few years with this team of my co-authors. That includes academics, researchers in the area of education, as well as practitioners, teachers, tutors at a Makerspace in Manurewa High School here in South Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand. As part of this work has obviously been done here in Aotearoa, in the land of Maori. And as someone coming from Mexico, I can only start to visualize, get a glimpse of the complexities of working and living in a country with a colonial past, and one where a lot of injustices and structural problems that come from history and continue to be problematic in this era. As part of that, I identify myself as a learner of Te Reo Maori, someone who lives here and who benefits from the colonial past of Aotearoa. Part of that journey for me is to become more aware and better educated in Maori principles, Maori language, life, and philosophies. And this is one of the frameworks that are available for researchers developed by Maori, not only for Maori populations. So this project is not about doing research on Maori groups, but frameworks that come from Maori wisdom and are applicable to all of us, and in particular to people from the South Pacific who also live in Aotearoa and who are an important group in this area of South Auckland as well. So the project I'm presenting here is part of a longer partnership. Now it's been 6 or 7 years working with this high school. And it comes in as part of a project that we got funding for in wanting to look at the digital technologies and Hangaro Matihiko curriculum by the Ministry of Education in Aotearoa. And this is, as many other countries, initiatives that the government sets up following the interests of big tech industry to increase the number and the diversity of tech workers in the coming years. So integrating digital technologies, computational thinking into the curriculum in all years of education, from early learning to university. So that is the context of this work. And we have been working since the creation of this Makerspace, now 4 years ago, in Manurewa High School. And this is a fabulous group of people, tutors, teachers, and students who have been working on this, like building this community around a makerspace. And I'm going to say a couple more things about that in terms of our project. So the project seeks to understand and support what we are calling advanced computational thinking, and the practices around this that prioritize ethical, creative, critical, reflective, and community dimensions in this maker funnel, this maker group. And that's what we mean by advanced when we say advanced computational thinking. So it's not just the coding and just the technology, but how to use it from an ethical, creative, critical, reflective, and community points of view. So what we prepared in the paper, what we wrote about in the paper is this activity that we call Crackers. And it's an advanced computational thinking food activity. So through the use of food, the activity seeks to bring people together to reflect and to learn from each other about the uses of digital technologies and specifically computational thinking. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about this because the activity and how it connects with the project is explained in the paper in detail. So here what I wanted to do is spend some time telling you about the connections more specific between this particular project and PDC at large. So in terms of the background or the threads in PDC that inform our work, we have things like participatory making by Sarah Valley in 2012 and 18, computational empowerment by Iverson and his group, creative coexistence from this Brazilian group led by Schultz, and learning and infrastructuring by Ericsson and their group. And these are primarily Sweden, Denmark, and Brazil initiatives. What we are conducting in this project is we want to bring slowness to the forefront, blurring or integrating with the everyday practices of, in this case, the makerspace, the community. We also brought great sessions obviously from design education, but we brought them as a research method or a research technique. The Makerspace, although it happens in the school, it's an out-of-school time, it's an after-school space. It does not have any connection to the curriculum, not explicitly, and it happens, everyone in the school are welcome, and students who join, they bring their interests and their passions and their projects to the space. And the adults in the space support that and often learn together with the students as well. We wanted to separate the computational thinking as a way of looking at digital technologies, using and engaging with digital technologies, and also beyond access. A lot of the work in this area tends to be about providing access of more diverse people, minorities, to tech. And we deeply feel that it's much more than just providing access to people. I'll go a little bit more in detail on that in the next slide. And we also want to make a contribution and continue to explore what Elizabeth Sanders calls bridging strategies from research to design. In some ways, I am the only trained designer in the team, but I see everyone in the team as designers. So I think that these are people who are constantly designing. The food activity of crackers was slow in its design. It took a little while to design it. First, it took a few months of just being in the space. We wanted to start the project. This was a 2-year project. It was obviously extended because of COVID for almost another year. But it was always meant to be the first year. And this is, of course, we knew the space, we knew the people before, but we wanted to spend some months with regular visits to the space and getting to know the students, getting to know the projects and the space, getting to know better the teachers and the tutors, and wanting to be part of the community in our way. And we were very, very lucky, extremely lucky and grateful for the group for welcoming us in the space. And it's fantastic, has been a fantastic opportunity and privilege that we are very grateful. We found that sharing kai is a word for food, that sharing kai is a very important part of the activities that happen in the afternoon in this space. And so that's how we thought that we would use food in similar ways to how they use it, but turn it into, instead of being like a support activity, bringing food to the center of the activity in the afternoon. And organizing this kind of like party, kind of like playful food activity, and doing it in terms of what Paulo Freire describes as generative themes. So as presenting problems, and I use the word problems broadly, like the way Freire does, bringing problems or bringing activities that code or encapsulate some interesting ideas and interesting issues, and giving it to them, putting it in front of the community, and then letting them, in an open-ended sense, letting them decode it in their own terms. And the intention here was as an activity for imagining future scenarios. And we are well aware of other food activities that are used in computational thinking, such as the peanut butter and jelly sandwich to reverse engineer an algorithm to make such type of sandwiches. But we took these existing activities almost as a counterexample of what we didn't want to do. We didn't want to reduce computational thinking to the design of an algorithm, and we didn't want to do it in the terms that the PB&J activity does. And again, you can refer to the paper if you're interested in how we purposefully wanted to move away from that space. I'm going to close now with some points, like perhaps broader points that are beyond the specifics of the crackers activity, which, as I said, the description of that activity and some thinking about it is in the paper. But maybe what we can learn from this type of exercises for the wider PDC community. So here are 6 points. The first 2 are perhaps more related to, of course, makerspaces and computational thinking, digital technologies spaces. We see we've gradually identified a problem even with the name of maker space. We now identify, like others have done in the past, but we've seen it live happening. The consequences of bringing this kind of like Silicon Valley doctrine, very, very specific from from Silicon Valley idea of tech kind of like maker spaces that are defined by the technology around them, and also by this identity of maker, of who is a maker and what makes a maker as an identity, and immediately who gets excluded from that idea of Silicon Valley maker. And instead of that, we advocate more for making spaces. And by making spaces, we mean a few different things. The first one is spaces where things are made, and not only tangible, typical things made in maker spaces like 3D printed stuff and so on, but other like friendships or mutual learning and ako, the Maori word for teaching and learning. So making of many other things, but also a space that is made by the people who are constantly there. We would also love to see more innovative activities that are obviously meaningful, that are derived from the ground up and co-designed and prepared with people, as opposed to a lot of what we see these days in terms of off-the-shelf methods and off-the-shelf activities that get replicated. I mean, the extreme are these kind of like parachuting design teams that go into Africa, Latin America, Asia, and they bring their activities and their ideas of what is design and what is participatory design. And instead of that, developing with the community more activities, and also more activities that are more dialogic, that are in the Freudian sense of never being fully designed, never being finished, and always being put forward as propositions for people to complete or to shape in their own terms. We also see a lot of opportunities in designing generative themes, and again, we use generative themes as a phrase, the way Paulo Freire uses it in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And searching the PDC library of previous conferences, there are only 2 papers, and one of them is this one, talking about generative themes. And I think that is a very, very important blind spot for the PDC community, not only in the space of learning, but also in the wider practices. The idea of what is a thematic fan and the craft of preparing a generative theme, the disposition in which the designer or the teacher or the adult or the organizer brings this theme and put it forward to the people, and what they can expect people to do with the theme. All of this, Paulo Freire was very careful to define and to think about. And I think we still have to catch up with those ideas from 50 years ago. I also see an opportunity, and I'm very excited to see strands in the PDC groups working with learning. I think that although this particular project has funding from education and learning, by definition, because of its nature, it's a very transdisciplinary project. And I see a lot of opportunities there as well in terms of bringing together learning and participatory design. Not only, as I said, as a way to work in formal and perhaps more importantly, informal learning spaces, but also in spaces that are not typically considered as a learning space, but to bring that learning lens to it. And I think the last point is perhaps the most important, is the importance, I think, of working in genuine partnerships. And also in even what a partnership means. To ground such definitions, I think, is important in the local knowledge, the local philosophies, the local culture, the local ways of working. Kia ora, thank you for listening. We want to acknowledge the Maker panel, the Maker group, the students, their parents for giving consent for them to participate and to be part of this project. Te Kura Taurua Manurewa High School. And funding for this project is from the TLRI fund by the New Zealand Council for Educational Research.
That's great. Thanks, Ricardo. We've already got 2 or 3 questions now in the Q&A. So can I invite you to, the first question is from Mary. And she says, do you think that the kind of food you were using, in this case, I think crackers, influenced the outcome?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Joyce. Definitely, not only the kind of food. Well, it was a decision. It was a bit of a hunch that we had, as opposed to the sandwich activity where you basically have just one go at making your sandwich. Here, the idea was to play with the iterative nature of coding and loops. So try a few times, and the idea that there needs to be some sort of order in which the cracker and then the topping, but very open-ended in terms of exploration. So yeah, definitely the type of food, and in the paper you will see that how we chose the ingredients was also an interesting process. We couldn't have done it without knowing the group and knowing the teachers and having been there for weeks and weeks for almost a year.
Yeah, great. As a Malaysian who's obsessed about food, I really would have enjoyed the activity and creative, the use of various food activities. So the second question we had is from Ricelli. Thank you, Ricardo, great work. Can you explain more about slowness as a method?
Yes, thank you. Before I do that, just commenting on what you said, Joyce, probably in Malaysia, we would probably do rojak or something like that to explain, to play with computational thinking. Ricelli, slowness is literally to take things easy. And the best I can do is I can remember when I was younger and backpacking around the world and thinking, oh, you know, like I need to go to this place and that place and that place. And I reached a point where I said, I'm in this country, I'm in this town, I'm going to stay here a couple of weeks and enjoy the day to day, right? I think that's a huge difference in not having to rush. And in participatory design, a lot of our work is project-based, and we do projects, we get funding. Obviously, you guys get PhDs and so on. And then we report that on a paper, and it's a project. And I'm less and less comfortable with that practice for various reasons. I believe much more in long-term partnerships, multi-year partnerships, where you really get to know people and they get to know you, and all sorts of conflicts arise and you deal with them, and all sorts of crises happen, but also all sorts of wonderful things happen. Sometimes even friendships, but certainly respect as colleagues. And so literally the project for the first year, we told the funding agency, we're not going to do anything for 1 year. We are going to be there in the space. And this reminds me, sorry, very quickly, this reminds me a mayor of Bogota in Colombia, who in the 90s said, his slogan was, I'm not going to solve any problems, vote for me. And Tanas Mocos, and his point was, I'm going to spend my term, I think it's a 3 or 4 year term probably. And he said, I'm going to spend my term studying and analyzing what are the problems so that the next mayor can solve them. And that's a bit of an anecdote, but I think that personally, I'm just very, very mindful that, of course, master's and PhD students need to graduate, so you can't be too slow. But in the other projects where I don't have those pressures, I'm trying to take things slow. And I think now also in the last 4 months, I've been collaborating with industry. And that's a luxury that academia can take and should take, the slowness that in industry you just can't do it. But in academia, I'm all for taking things slow. And by the way, I think COVID taught us to take things slowly. Maybe we were in a rush before and we said, no, we cannot do that. And COVID came and said, guess what? You can.
Absolutely. I agree, Ricardo. That theme of taking your time and slowness and building relationship really resonated with me when I was reading through your paper. There's a comment from more of a reflection from Charika, sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, around advocating for making space and acknowledging the othering that happens as the discourse of who is the designer in the participatory design work as it's being unpacked. Would also love more work on the intergenerational generative themes, and he or she thank you for your presentation. I think time for one more specific question from Katerina. And then I think the question from Katerina about the ethics, I think we could maybe also bring that in as a general discussion with Ricelli and Joel as well. So the specific question from Katerina is about how did the participants relate the insights from the critical sessions and the crackers activity to what else they do in the makerspace? Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Sorry, I missed that. You repeat that, Joyce? Sorry.
Yes, so the question from Katerina was, how did the participants relate the insights from the critical sessions and the cracker activity to what they're doing in the makerspace? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, there were some interesting. This was one of many activities that we did, and there has been, again, that's a problem I think of talking about like specific events, because the conversations have kept on going, and the point where we thought there was something very special about these particular activities when we returned to the space, and the adults in the space with the children were doing their own versions of crackers for their own purposes. That's when we really thought, okay, there was something there. It was not like a one-off thing, but it became a practice, because as I said, we kind of like hijacked the idea of food, because food was really important in the space to begin with, to create community. So we used food, and of course, maybe it's not a surprise that they kept using food in more intentional ways. And there were all sorts of conversations about algorithmic thinking, automation. What does it mean? I think the biggest one, if I can encapsulate it, is because in this area of research, one of the things that I've learned is that instead of measuring or instead of assessing what children do and how they change their thinking, and this, by the way, applies to my parenting experience, I think the best indicator that children are moving is when you look at the adults around them. And if the adults around them are changing their thinking, then I can guarantee you that the children are. So our thinking has changed a lot about who designs technology and for what purposes, and what does it mean to design technological solutions for something as private and meaningful as eating food, right? And I won't even go into transgenics and everything else, but just the fact, just the way of preparing and serving and presenting and consuming food and sharing food. When we bring technology into that intimate connection between people, and that has absolutely transformed my own thinking. I self-taught myself when I was 11. I learned computer programming, mostly on my own, and it took me decades to actually understand that there are a lot of politics in learning programming, and there are a lot of politics in and philosophical implications of wanting children to learn programming, and we should be really careful how we do that.
That's great. Thanks, Ricardo. I think that's the message is there's politics in everything we do, isn't it? Into everything. Right. I think it'd be great to now perhaps invite Ricelli and Joel into the conversations, and actually Katrina's question in the Q&A around ethical approval when you're working with communities, and particularly in this session we are working with young adults and children, and that was a question raised by Sarah early on with Netta's presentation. So again, the question around kind of how do you go about going through that process, especially working in communities that may not be aware or that familiar with kind of consent forms that we might meet in academic research. So perhaps I can ask Joel and Ricelli to comment briefly on that question.
You want to go first?
I can just speak for myself. Most of my research is with students, and so then I'm very careful to very open and honest about what I'm trying to do and what my ambitions are for my time with them, and also to collect their consent. So I've got reams of consent that I've collected from them.
Yeah, I would say the same, and also it connects to the slowness, I think, topic, because in my PhD, I'm working with the same community for like 3 years during my whole thesis. So I think also it's a matter of like building trust. So for me, basically the first year before the first workshop was mainly just spending time with them. And this is a tip also that I got from an anthropologist that I talked with in the beginning of my research. So yeah, sometimes, especially with working with communities, they don't care much about all this paperwork, right? So what they care is that if they can trust you and if they know you. So time is very important, and spending this time and building relationships. So I think that's one strategy that I would advise always. And then it's also good because then if people trust you, they will want to participate in your project also. So
yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ricardo. Ricardo, would you like to comment briefly on that before we move on to more final kind of questions?
No, I think we can move on. Yes.
Okay, yes, great. I guess we had so many questions in this session, which is great, and so that leaves me with, I guess, a final summing up question that I would like to pose to all of you, which is, I guess, I would like to invite you to reflect a bit on the theme of the session, really, which is about experimenting with generative learning methods and approaches, and the role that participation plays in doing so. So if you could mull about that briefly and perhaps give a reflection on that, that would be a really nice way to sum up the session. Putting you on the spot.
I can, yeah, you did. But I think, well, I'm going to refer back to a short paper we did with Vicky Gerard in 2014 for the PDC in Namibia, where we talked about the different dimensions. And for this session in particular, I think the practices one is interesting. Now that I'm working in part-time in industry, people expect us, people expect experts, let's say, who they call experts. I don't like that word, but people expect experts to know their tools. And what I'm seeing in this space of generative practices and participation is that knowing our tools is a huge risk, because then we go back to those tools. And I'm not saying that well-known tools we shouldn't use, we probably should, but we should be a lot more reflective on how we design an activity, how we choose a tool, how we present a brief. I think we should just be, that would be my invitation for all of us to be more reflective on that process.
Great, thanks, Ricardo. Final words from Joel and Ricelli?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned also during this process, like we talk a lot about participation, and what does that even mean? Like it can mean many different things in many different contexts. So I had all these ideas or tools of what is participation, what's participatory design, what are tools that we can use. And once I really get to spend time with people, some of it I use, but most what I use, it's what I ask from them. What would work for you, right? Like what can we do together, like using the skills that you have, for example, because sometimes we have a tool and it doesn't work with everyone. So you really need to be open to hear them out, and then you can adapt to whatever previous knowledge that you have.
Great, thank you. Joel, very quickly, 30 seconds.
I think that's exactly the same thing I would say, to accept the limitations of one's own knowledge and one's own experience, and to be willing and open to listen and learn is such an important part of teaching and of being part of the participatory process, I guess, for me.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Ricelli, Jenk, Ricardo, and Netta. We've run out of time, but before we do, just a quick orientation for the next few hours and the rest of the day. Next slide, Paulina, if you can. And please take note, there's another full paper track coming up for the European, African, and Americas region. There's also 2 EP sessions, and then very early morning, and then another session the next day. So thank you again so much for all the speakers. We had too many questions, which is really enjoyable, and I take away from the session around taking your time and slowness, and not knowing our tools well, which is a great thing. Thank you again. Thank you for coming. And
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.